my God, guys, fat phobia is alive and well. Dear Lord.
You're walking on hot coals now, you thought it was your joke. Yeah, you're a hoax, and now I found you out.
Hello! Quick little intro, disclaimer, trigger warning. In this video, I'm going to be discussing weight gain, weight loss, diet culture, disordered eating, etc. So if any of these topics would be triggering for you, I warn you to proceed with caution or exit out of the video now. Thank you. So in this video, I'm going to be discussing fat phobia and how my perspective has changed from being a plus size person to my current state being a straight size person. Sort of fucked up because the ironic thing is a lot of straight size people will not listen to a fat person's experience until it's coming from a skinny person. I'll get into that later in the video. It's all tied together. It all connects. So before we get into the after effects of fat phobia, let me tell you a little bit about my weight gain story. It goes all the way back to childhood, y'all. All the way back to when I was a wee girl. So I grew up with a family of 4 sisters. I was the youngest of the 4. So in a household of all sisters, there was a lot of emphasis placed on our looks and our appearance. I'm not going to dive into the whole history of the traumatic relationship that I have with my mother, but in our family, she was really the driver of making our looks our number one priority. A lot of that is how she directly interacted with her daughters, but another piece of that is how she treated herself. She found validation in her looks. She was a very small lady, stayed skinny the majority of her life, worked out, and maintained the disordered eating of every mom in the early 2000s. Growing up, I remember we used to have tons of diet food in the cabinets, like Skinny Cow. We only had Skinny Cow ice creams and, Weight Watchers frozen meals, that kind of thing. Food in our household was very limited, and I felt a deep sense of shame about eating from a abhorrently young age. I have a hard time remembering a lot of my childhood, but some pieces that stick out to me about eating is I would army crawl on my hands and knees to the snack cabinet to get food because I knew I'd be reprimanded if my mom saw me getting food. I developed some very sneaky habits to try and hide my eating. And this is when I was a child. I was growing. I was very much a normal size. And to be frankly honest, I was neglected and needing some sense of fucking comfort. So food it was. I would do things to try and hide my eating, like shoving wrappers down into couch cushions or layering trash on top of wrappers so no one could see. A lot of heavy, shameful habits that I developed at an early age. Fast forward a little bit to the end of middle school, beginning of high school. My parents are getting a divorce. Anyone in my personal life will tell you one of the worst divorces people have seen go down in history. Parents had a very toxic, tumultuous relationship. They separated multiple times, but this was the final one. And at this moment, it was sort of like a mental break for my mom, and she was never the same since. Point being, I had a incredibly unstable home life throughout high school, and I moved out of my childhood home, was going back and forth to different apartments. Parents hated each other and were in court for years, and received some pretty severe abuse at the hands of my mother. So, dealing with this intense amount of stress at the ripe age of 12, 13, 14, 15, I began to rely heavily on food for any sense of comfort. So funny. I'm sorry, I feel like this is a therapy session a little bit right now, but it gives me a lot of anxiety to talk about, but it's important to talk about, so we'll get through it. Also, at this time, my dad used to be the breadwinner, so my mom would have to go in and work, and sometimes we just wouldn't have food in the house. So when there was, I would be scarfing it down and holding on to it for dear life. So as I was going through this really intense home life situation, I think I gained a little bit of weight, but also you're going through puberty, you're ugly, you have acne all over your face, things are changing, your body looks different. I don't think it was anything necessarily majorly out of the norm. I have this one memory from high school when I went to the doctor for my physical and it was time to get weighed. She took a look at the number and she said, "Well, you've always been sort of chubby, haven't you?" Holy shit. The amount of uncalled comments I have received in my life about having some fat on me is woo-wee, zooey mama. Holy shit. I cuts deep to this day. My senior year of high school, I cut off contact with my mom, moved in permanently with my dad, which was a calmer scenario, so it sort of gave me a breath a little bit. So I was able to go to the gym more and sort of be more conscious about my eating. All right, we've gone through all of the background stuff of sort of where my mindset was going into college, which is where I gained weight significantly. I graduated high school in 2016 and went to UMass Amherst, which, lucky for me, was the number one in dining out of all universities in the United States. The food was great, I'm not gonna lie. It was very delicious. On Halloween, we had lobster, which was crazy. And you know, everyone jokes about the freshman 15, the freshman 20, however much weight you gain in college, and that definitely happened to me. I certainly gained some weight just getting used to the cafeteria style dining all the time, and nobody really talks about it, but going to college is a little bit of a jarring experience. Suddenly you're away from home, where my home life, first of all, wasn't stable at all, and my parents were not reliable for any emotional availability, and you're thrust into this literal zoo of thousands and thousands of other 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. Personally, that's not an environment I particularly thrive in. In retrospect, I think it was very stressful for me, so thus the eating would continue. Also, when I joined college, I ended up rushing a sorority because I wanted some sense of community. At that time in my life, it seemed like a good way to make girlfriends, and my current friends are still from that sorority, but overall, the sorority experience for me was horrible. I ended up being put in an executive position at 19 years old, called personnel chair, or standards if you're familiar with that from your own Greek life experience. But basically, that person is in charge of all of the rules of your organization, getting people in trouble when they weren't following the rules, having meetings with people to discuss like better plans, and if they weren't meeting their financial obligations, how would we make a plan to make that happen? It was just an immense responsibility to put on a 19-year-old in charge of 130 other sorority women, and I had a really hard time with it. I know you're probably wondering, why didn't you leave? It just didn't feel like an option. All my friends, all my social activities were through this organization, so I felt like I had to stay. But I was crying all the time. At this time in my life, I started to gain weight quite rapidly. And where I sort of topped off with my weight gain is when I studied abroad in London. So this was my second semester, junior year. I'd always wanted to study abroad, so I decided to do it in London. And unfortunately, it wasn't the best situation. I didn't necessarily find my place with any people I was vibing with. I was drinking heavily. I was doing an unpaid internship at a very toxic environment on top of doing classes. I was paying for everything all by myself, so it was very stressful. I'm in a whole new country. I'm broke. I'm trying to pass my classes. I'm trying to manage my life. I think at this point in my life, I got up to a 2X, I want to say. It's so hard when your clothes aren't fitting you anymore. I bought some Madewell jeans, which at the time for me was a very expensive pair of jeans, and they ripped while I was in London, like in the thigh, and I was like, oh my God, I can't afford a new pair. There's so much that goes into gaining a lot of weight. At this time in my life, I also had a lot of financial stressors. Parents, if they're able, frequently help their kids throughout college. Kids don't always have to be working jobs. That was the opposite for me. I was working multiple jobs on top of my classes, and I was just so depressed. I was just going through it. I was having a really hard time. I was reeling through the after effects of my family situation, on top of taking classes, on top of maintaining a social life, on top of being in charge of the sorority's rules, on top of my multiple jobs. It was just way too much stress for little old me. And in turn from all of this, I developed extremely low self-esteem. I became the ultimate people pleaser. I would be so friendly, so kind to everyone, would go out of my way to make everybody comfortable. And don't even get me started on my experience with men. As a plus-size person, if you are fat, men do not give a fuck about you, especially college-age guys. I never got any romantic attention when I was in college. I'd be lucky if a man looked at me. It was a very traumatizing experience to not be treated like a human purely based off what I look like. I was always the fattest one of the bunch, so when I would go out with my friends and we would talk with some guys at the bar, they would not face me. They would not look at me. It was extremely dehumanizing. And what else was hard about it is I couldn't relate to anyone in my life. My skinny friends didn't understand, and I don't think they ever will until you are put in that position. The only time I felt wanted by men is if it was sexually on a dating app behind closed doors. I didn't go on one date in college. I didn't date anyone in college. No one was interested. No one wanted to fucking talk to me. Point blank, period. Simple as that. I feel very sad for this previous version of myself. Now, time to talk about weight loss. So while I was studying abroad, I sort of had this sit-down conversation with my sister where I couldn't stop crying. I was sort of the lowest I had ever been, extremely depressed, and I felt very physically ill. I was getting sick very frequently and it would last a very long time, and I simply had a hard time breathing. There was so much weight on me that it took a lot of effort to breathe, and that wears on your bones. Skinny people, you don't know how hard it is to be fucking fat. It isn't easy. Oh, go work out. You know how hard it is to work out when you have all that excess body weight on you and you're weak? It's very hard. So all that was just sort of catching up to me, and in that state, I sort of had a come to Jesus moment where I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I need to be more healthy in some aspect because it is physically and mentally paining me to continue on like this. So going into my senior year at college, I was trying to be really conscientious about what I was eating. It was still a really big challenge for me, and this was a very gradual change in weight loss, but I was able to sort of stabilize my weight and lower it by a few pounds. I have this memory of when I was at a frat party dancing with my friends, and I overheard this group of boys behind me, and one of them said, like, I'm gonna go, like, oh, she's so hot, I'm gonna go after her, and he was talking about me, and I was like, woo! Biggest compliment ever. In that moment, I felt like I had won. Like, finally, they can see me now that I'm slightly smaller, which feels really disturbing to think about. And then out of nowhere, in the middle of my second semester senior year, COVID hit. I was sent home from school, all my classes moved online, I wasn't seeing anybody anymore. And though COVID was an absolute worldwide tragedy, for me personally, it really gave me that break I needed to reevaluate myself, really dive into mindfulness, and figure out a way for me to actually lose the weight. And the main way for me was a caloric deficit. If you're not familiar with what a caloric deficit is, that's basically when you are eating less calories than how much you're burning a day. It is very easy to not understand how much you are actually eating until you're tracking it. Tracking your calories can be a very slippery slope, so I do want to warn you, if you get obsessive about things, maybe calorie tracking isn't the best option for you. So when I was at home in a less stressful environment, not working a job, the entire world was quiet, I could really hyper-focus on my weight loss journey and exercise. Now listen to me very carefully. You need to be in a place of privilege to lose weight. So in this example, I was back living at home. I wasn't going to school. I didn't have a job. I had a large amount of time and energy to focus on weight loss and health and my fitness. As I started to lose the weight, people began noticing. And in my entire weight loss journey, this was probably the most painful part. The majority of people in my life had something to say about it. People would say, Kendall, you look so much younger. You're so beautiful now. People would start to do general acts of kindness. They would hold the door for me. They would smile at me as we passed by. Generally, the public would just treat me better in a smaller body. And the reason it was so painful is because I had only really understood the previous treatment I was experiencing in college, so the ignoring, the looking through me. So to have it come true, to have people treat me better when I was losing weight, was the biggest slap in the face. It felt like I was betraying a previous version of myself. I was so frustrated that people couldn't see that that plus-size person was the same as me. And why would you ever treat anyone differently based on their size? As someone who was plus size and just has a general sense of empathy, I would never treat anyone differently ever. But damn, does fat phobia got a grip on society. Holy crap. I had to have a conversation with my dad, actually, who was commenting on my weight loss and etc. I told him, like, this validation of my weight loss feels like you wouldn't love me no matter what size I would be. Like, I'm only lovable if I am size 8 and below, which was a hard thing to say, but it's truly how I felt. Losing weight really wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. It was more like a slap in the face of, oh, this is how I could have been treated the entire time. Or, oh, this is how society viewed me and how society views fat people. It felt really horrible, and I will never forget that experience. So during COVID time, 2020, 2021, I lost a bit of weight, went back down to a strong size large, I would say. And then I moved out to Boston for a year, and then I moved to New York City, which is where I've been for the past 2 years of my life. And since I've moved to New York City, I think I've had another layer of weight loss. Living in a city has really forced me to be more of an active person, which I actually love. I live on the top of a 6th floor walk up. I walk a mile to get my groceries. You know, you're just sort of walking, biking everywhere. So that on top of really figuring out my personal mental health, I got on antidepressants this past year. I didn't realize I was so depressed, and they've been helping me tremendously, an absolute life-saving drug. I've also had that separation from my family, which I have really needed. I didn't realize how neglected I was by my parents, and I've really been coming to terms with that in therapy and sort of actually healing from those childhood experiences. And being completely independent and not having to rely on anyone has really freed my mind. And most recently, I have been loving yoga. I have the studio near me that I absolutely adore, and I try and go as much as I can, so that's another way that I am moving my body. So again, I don't know how much weight I've lost in this entire journey, but like now my top is a medium. Sometimes I can fit into mediums on the bottom half of me. That is where I'm at. Weight loss wise. Weight will always fluctuate, guys. I'm sure I will be bigger again. I'm sure I might be smaller. Who knows? Alright, so now that you have the history of my weight gain and my weight loss, let's talk about the after effects. One of the first immediate things I noticed as I lost the weight was the attention from men. Boy, did it increase. Numerous boys from my high school started sliding in those DMs. The popular boys who would not look my direction when I was fatter, and they were hitting. They wanted a piece of me. And since that time when I initially lost weight and have really grown on my social media and developed my personal style, gotten good at makeup, my hair, etc., the attention from men has really increased. It's no secret that people are now attracted to me. It is just the complete opposite experience of what I had from when I was fat. But I was fat in those very formative years. So when I developed that really low self-esteem, that has stuck with me despite my outward appearance changing. So what does that mean for me in dating? That means I don't know how to make a boundary. I accept horrible treatment because I've never even been looked at before. I'll take anything that I can get. So it's attracted some not so satisfactory men into my life. There's another big piece of me that has felt so rejected that I am so hypersensitive now to any slight dismissal. So when I go out with my friends who happen to be smaller than me and the attention is on them, I feel such a deep sense of hurt. And I don't look that much different than them. But it always feels like men will choose the skinniest girl in the room. It's a really weird experience. Finally, I lost all the weight, and this previous version of myself would have done anything to look like me. And now that I do, it's not as magical as I was expecting it to be. In a messed up way, it feels like I can never be skinny enough, which of course I know isn't true, and I'm very happy with what my body looks like. I've always loved what it looks like, but my relationships with men make me feel like I have to be skinnier. There's a lot of discussions in the body positive community about women who lose weight and then turn on the body positive community and end up coming out with really fatphobic things to say. And I have to admit that even I have fallen victim to that experience. There was a part of me that found extreme satisfaction in the newfound acceptance I found from society. Finally, I'm getting attention, I am getting love, I am getting praise. So you sort of lean into that weight loss narrative to get attention. This is something that I try to be very mindful about because I think we can all be beautiful at every size. I was beautiful then, I'm beautiful now. There's so much more that goes into it than just your size. Now let's talk a little bit about body dysmorphia. I'm not going to claim I actually experience body dysmorphia. I feel like usually it's a very extreme thing, but I have a very hard time conceptualizing what I look like. I very often just feel like I am in that same fat body that I was before, because I am in the same body. This is the same skin I was in. I really don't understand if I look skinny or fat or skinny fat or whatever. You know, frequently in my social media comments, people ask me how I am so confident. And the real answer to that is because I used to be double the size I am now, and I would have killed to be in this body. Once you have the perspective of being in a larger body, you will not take anything for granted. Another thing about losing weight is suddenly I feel like I'm in on the secret. My thin friends will say things to me that maybe they would have withheld when I was in a larger body. But I genuinely feel like I don't fit in. I still feel like the reject. I still feel like nobody wants to talk to me. Nobody loves me. So that's why we are in intense therapy. But it's a process. It's gonna take me a lot of time and self-exploration to really dive in here. But moral of the story, can we all be nice to each other? Be nice to fat people. Consider what they're going through. Fat people are humans just like the rest of us, and nobody should be treated differently just based on what they look like. Also, let's have some compassion. Being fat is hard on a multitude of levels. Anyway, I've been rambling for quite a while now. I know this is a little opposite to the videos I typically do, and it's a little bit of an intense topic, so thank you for sticking through it if you've made it this far. If you could relate to anything in this video or have experienced similar things, I hear you, I see you, your experience is valid. I love you guys very much. If you are new here, please subscribe. I would love to see you around, and I will see you later. Bye, losers.